take it from you? Thanks. Okay, I'm going to do something really quick because I want to remember this moment. I'm going to count to 3. I want everyone to scream TED as loud as you can because I want to take a photo of this and remember it. All right, you ready? 1, 2, 3. TED! There you go. Nice. Okay, I'm going to toss this over because I don't want to be distracted. By the way, I'm going to put that on Twitter, and that will be on breakfast television, which can be seen 6 to 9 weekdays, CityTV, Monday to Friday. Cheap plugs, but I had to get it in there. Here's the title of my talk today. Every conversation counts. And I gotta say I'm pumped to be here, and it's a real honor because a couple months back when they asked me to come here and speak on this forum, it's been an interesting journey. And it's a great opportunity to be here for TED, but to be a part of SFU because essentially back in 2002, that's where the journey began. And when this whole theme of going against the grain kicked in, that's how I've lived my life. And through the power of conversations, things have really changed for me. And I want to share some of the most powerful conversations for me. And hopefully you guys take something away from it. A lot of people ask me, the most commonly asked question I get is, in 2002 I graduated with a degree in finance, minored in HR. And the most commonly asked question is, well, how do you go from studying derivatives and short selling stocks to getting a gig on MTV Canada? And it started with a conversation. 10 years ago, I was at a conference in Quebec City, and it was an ISEC conference. Are there any ISECers here in the audience today? I like you, loud and proud. You're changing the world. This group's all about international student exchange, and when I was doing a session, facilitating a session in HR, there's a guy by the name of Lotfi El Gandouri. He is not here today. He lives in Spain, and he's a business coach and business consultant, and I've had 5 conversations with him in my life. The first of which was when he pulled me aside after the conference and he said to me, I was 22 years old, and he said to me, listen, I know you're about to finish your degree, but I don't think you should go into business. And I said, listen, I grew up in an Indian family. If I don't go into business, there's going to be a problem. Because if you grew up in an Indian family, you know if you're not a doctor, lawyer, dentist, or something in the investment world, the parents are going to freak out just a bit. But Lotfi really challenged me because he believed in what I could do in the business, and he said, take 1 year of your life and see what you can do. He said, stop playing safe and just start living life. And in that conversation, I realized something very important to me, in that it was, what did it take to get into the business? Well, one, a crystal clear belief that I could do it, and he planted the seed, and I started to believe it. I mean, the other was, it was a lot of courage to take the risk to leave the safety. I mean, I had done the finance degree, I had done the Canadian Securities course, so it took a lot of courage to do it. And the third, the thing that got me into the business, and I said on Twitter, you're going to get brown steel today, it essentially was this. Yes, those are blue contacts, earrings, and that's when my hair was black. And I don't use a spray can for this. This is real. When I graduated Simon Fraser University, I had to really get creative in terms of how I would break into the business. This was actually an application for the Much Music Temp contest in 2002. And if you're not familiar with the contest, essentially, you win a car, you win a bunch of cash, but most importantly, you get in the building with people that do television, and that was my opportunity to learn. So when I finished SFU, I entered every single contest you could imagine. Z95 at the time had a sticker spotter contest. I applied to be the stunt guy on a morning show. And then when I heard about the temp contest, I had taken a magazine publishing course in my final semester at Simon Fraser University. So traditionally they say, hey, submit a video and answer this questionnaire and we'll see if you're worthy of being the temp. So instead, I pulled together some of my friends. We did a mock photo shoot, spoofed some of the ads you see in the magazine, and we put together a 16-page spread called the Riaz Meghji magazine, and that is the cover that broke it in. And when you think about the idea of having your own magazine, I'm like, hey, it worked for Oprah, why can't it work for me? Now, I did not win this contest, but Rick Campanelli, who's known as being the temp, he held the magazine up, and I was runner-up, so I got a bit of cash. But because of this, somebody tipped me off and they said, hey, did you know that MTV Canada exists here in Vancouver and they tape a daily video countdown show? And at the time, I didn't know. So I went down in the studio, and I'm the type of guy, I'm a risk taker by nature, because I think Scott Belsky, author of Making Ideas Happen, he said it best, and he said, nothing extraordinary happens through ordinary means. So I was ready to take a risk. I went down to the studio, sat in the audience, kind of analyzed the situation. That's me. I like to sit back and see what's happening. Saw who the host was, saw who the director was, and right when the show ended, I went right up to the director, and I remember this conversation distinctly, because I said, hey, nice to meet you, I'm Riaz. And the director just kind of looks at me, and if you know television directors, they don't have the time of day for any random to just come up to them. And he said, yeah. And I asked him, what would it take for a guy like me to be a host on this show? And he said, well, what kind of experience do you have? And I said, well, in broadcast, I don't have any. He said, well, where'd you go to broadcast school? And I said, well, I didn't. And then he responded immediately and said, well, what could you possibly have to offer me? And I looked him straight in the eye. And you know when you have those tough conversations, and it's really awkward, and you don't want to flinch, and you get all tense, and you don't really got to say the first word, and the butt cheeks kind of clench up, and I just looked at him straight in the eye, and I said, well, I got a passion to do this. And he paused, and he said, well, why don't you come back Friday for a screen test? We'll see what you got. Sure enough, I got in the elevator thinking, okay, I got to come back Friday for a screen test. I have no idea what I'm doing. I went to business school. I got some basic presentation skills, but you know what? I'm just going to do my best to see what happens. Went through the motions, did the screen test. He saw something. It wasn't a home run. And he said, why don't you come back next week for an unpaid internship, and we'll see what you got. I came back the following week. For 2 weeks, I wasn't sure what was going to happen. Essentially, I was handing out flyers at the corner of Robson and Broad with high school kids saying, hey, why don't you come check out this MTV show? It's a lot of fun. That turned into 2 months. And I was questioning, how long can I do this? And he wanted to see the magazine. He liked my attitude. And sure enough, after 2 months, he said, listen, our news reporter's leaving the show. He's moving down to LA. We have an opening. I like what you represent. If you want the job as the news reporter on MTV, the job is yours. And I learned very quickly that if I believe in it, someone else will too. Now, from 2002 to 2006, things essentially exploded. The learning curve was vertical because I went from being an MTV host and producer Monday to Friday, being scouted by CTV News, believe it or not, to be a fill-in weathercaster for Tamara Taggart. She's a lot prettier than I am. I'm okay with that. But she was a great mentor for me to understand how to do live. Before I knew it, a television station in Toronto had recruited me over to be an entertainment reporter. I then became an entertainment anchor, and by 2006, I'd been in the business 4 years, and I had learned so much. But there's something I learned very quickly from the entertainment business, is that it is a very, very fickle business. You can be here today and gone by 4 p.m. And I take a lot of pride in what I do because I like to be creative, and to me, creativity is just intelligence having fun. And in 2006, I saw firsthand, and you probably hear about this all the time, as the media business shrinks. I was working with a team 25 to 30 strong, and the entire team was decimated down to 3 people, myself and 2 producers. Our daily show became a weekly, and the product I saw on air was something I just wasn't proud of. It was essentially, my spirit was dying, our resources were scarce, and I was questioning whether or not this was going to be a future for me in television. So in the spring of 2006, I made a very bold decision, and I decided to quit. I wasn't happy with the way things were going, and I did not know what the next step was going to be. It was one of the scariest times of my life because I realized something very quickly, and it is that complacency cultivates mediocrity. In my eyes, life is too damn short to do something you just don't love. So, not having a plan, I'm the kind of guy that, again, likes to take risks, so I went traveling. I've been to maybe 15, 16 countries in my time, and every single trip I had learned something new. And when I decided where I was going to travel after I quit, I decided I wanted to go to Pakistan. Because in 2005, they had a devastating earthquake, and I knew I wanted to give back, because one of the big values of what I represent is philanthropy, and to me, giving is living. So when I went over to Pakistan, I had some family in Karachi, and they wanted people to stay for about a year to help out with the earthquake relief, and I knew I didn't want to commit a year, but I knew I wanted to be a part of something, I wanted to see something. So I went over to Pakistan for about a month, and I went traveling through the country, and in all of my travels, I never really liked to buy anything, I just liked to take photos, because I remember photos as the best souvenirs. And I remember I had a driver, he didn't speak English, it was an interesting experience, but there was trust there, and we drove 10 hours up into the area of Muzaffarabad. Now, the interesting thing about Muzaffarabad was that thousands of people had been killed in this area from the earthquake. But these people did not want to leave. And when I kind of analyzed what was going on, all of these buildings had been devastated, and when my driver had said to me that he wanted to sleep, I'm like, you sleep, I'm going to go for a walk. And when I did, I came across this school, and this is probably one of the most powerful photos I've ever seen in terms of how I live life now. And I saw some kids playing on the school, and oddly enough, some of the sayings on the school were in English. And I don't know if you can read this, but it says, "Defeat never comes to any man until he admits it." And I remember standing there thinking, I don't know what my next step is going to be. I did waver at the time and think, maybe I should just go back to business, get my MBA, and play the game of life safe, like I thought the plan would be back in 2002. But then I read this, and had a bit of an epiphany and a self-conversation, if you will, that it is up to me of what I am about to create next. And because of this photo, and because of this saying, I ended up going back home to Vancouver and thinking, I gotta get back to the creative aspect that created that fire, that passion of what I had back in 2002. So when I moved back, I spent thousands of dollars on an HD camera, got an edit system, and then just started creating once again. I was doing freelance videos, corporate videos, wedding videos, anything I could, just to bring that fire back. But I realized I wanted to host because I loved the idea of conversations. And I remember calling my brother up, and I'm honored that he flew in for this. He's in the audience today. And I said, hey, it's not going to happen in Vancouver. If I want to make an impact, I got to come back to Toronto. Can I crash at your place? And this was a very humbling experience for me because in 2007, think about this. I'm 5 years out of my business grad at SFU. I'm $25,000 in debt, and I'm sleeping on an air mattress in my brother's man cave. And I looked at my brother, and he asked me this very important question. Well, what do you want? Anytime I have struggled in my life, it's because I have not been able to answer this question. Anytime I've had a conversation with somebody else that says they're not happy with their state of being, there is confusion as to what this answer is. And I remember thinking to myself, looking at my brother as he asked me that question, I said, buddy, I'm sleeping on your air mattress in your little man cave here. Some clean sheets and some fresh pillows would be a good start. But because of that question, I started writing. And in 2007, I actually do this exercise, and I encourage you, if you don't write, to try this. At the beginning of every year, I write a letter to myself in terms of what I want to do, what I want to have, and what I want to be. And at the end of the year, I will read this letter back to see what I actually accomplished from the goals I wrote down. In 2007, I actually wrote down a bunch of goals, one of which was to meet and interview Will Smith. And for me, Will Smith is a big deal because I love what he represents. I love the energy. And at the end of the year, I remember calling my brother and I said, hey, guess what? One of my biggest goals happened from 2007. My brother actually works in television too, and in December of 2007, for my birthday, he said, I'm going to fly you out to LA because I'm going to interview Will Smith and you're going to act as the producer in the room. And we both had the chance to meet Will Smith, and it was such an amazing experience because everything I thought he would be, he was, and then some. In 2008, I wrote down in January that I wanted to get back to hosting, and I literally wrote down, I want to host a show where I can educate, enlighten, and entertain an audience on a daily basis, and above all, have fun. Well, in December of 2008, I got a call from a little show called Breakfast Television, and guess what? I've been doing it for 4 years straight. The power of writing essentially has gone a long way for me, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity that Breakfast Television has provided me because of this mantra, that every conversation does count. And when I look back at the last 10 years of conversations, there have been so many that have stood out to me that have changed my perspective. And I want to share with you one with master illusionist David Copperfield. Everyone know who David Copperfield is? A couple of you guys? He's one of the greatest, maybe he's a little older now, he's one of the greatest entertainers in the world. If you've ever seen his show, it is amazing what he can pull off. And back in my MTV days, I believe it was about 2004, whenever you do these interviews with the stars, I always say it's like speed dating with celebrities. Because you only have 5 or 10 minutes with them. You got to go in, you got to make a good impression, and then hopefully get a soundbite and put a story together. And I could tell MTV Canada was on digital at the time. We were the last interview. I walked in the room. I could tell David was cranky at the time. But in that interview, and now I don't even look at them as interviews anymore. I just look at them as conversations. David and I were going back and forth. And we started talking about the Bahamas because he just owned he just bought some property in the Bahamas. We started talking about his love for rap music, and we got along really well. And it was a Tuesday night in Vancouver, and he was doing shows Tuesday and Wednesday night. And I remember at the end of the interview, as the producer just gave us the rap sign, I said to him, Dave, if we have more time, I take you out in the town, we do it right. And the interview ended. And I remember David looked at me right after when he was taking his mic off, and he said, so I'm here for 2 nights. You're the kind of guy that I would hang out with. Can we Will we go out tonight? And I really paused for a second. I looked at his assistant, and his assistant said, well, he's not joking. So David looks at me, and he's like, well, do we have transportation? And I just thought, dude, I'm 24 years old. I got a 1990 Honda Accord, ready to ride shotgun. And David Copperfield looks at me, and he's like, really? You have room for me? And I'm thinking, you're David Copperfield. So wave a magic wand, turn it into a Lamborghini or something, right? So sure enough, I go to a show. And I guess the word gets out with some of the Vancouver media that we're taking David Copperfield out. So at the end of the show, I look at David, I'm like, are we doing this? He's like, we're doing this. So he's like, I gotta take a shower, I'll be right out. And I'm like, okay. He's got a deck of cards with him the whole time. I'm just freaking out. I'm like, this is David Copperfield in the Honda Accord. That does not help the resale value of a used car, just in case you know. I tried, it does not work. But I remember we made our way over to Oprah's Hotel, we were sitting at a round table with David. And all the media were asking him questions about, oh, David, how's it like with this? Well, how does it feel to have all this money and a celebrity? And I could tell, I was just watching him, and I could tell he was getting annoyed by the line of questioning. Because the thing I think he appreciated about what I brought to him is that I didn't care. I do not ask for autographs, I do not ask for photos, I ask for good conversations, because that's what you essentially remember, and that's what I want to learn from. And when people were asking that question, I remember I looked right at David, and I asked him, hey, would you say that given everything you've got in your life, you're happy as a person? And David had his drink in his hand, and he literally put his drink down. He turned his head, and he looked right at me. And again, it was that awkward moment where you ask that question, you're like, oh no, did we just piss off David Copperfield? And he said to me, he's like, you know what, no one's really asked me that question before. And I said, well, how would you answer? And he said, look, man, I do 300 to 400 shows a year. I'm always on the road. I question who my true sense of friends are. And my relationship with Claudia Schiffer fell apart. I struggle with it. And in that moment, in that conversation, it changed the way I looked at the game. Because it's not about celebrities. I don't care about celebrity status. What I care about is a good story that can inspire an audience. And thanks to David Copperfield, I looked at the game completely different. Now I want to close with this in terms of conversations, because my favorite moment in the business actually happened this year in 2012. And Rick Hansen, how many people know Rick Hansen? Okay, he's a little bit more popular than David Copperfield. That's good. You should be. He's a Canadian icon. Rick Hansen, known for the Man in Motion tour, wheels around the world, inspires the masses, has raised millions of dollars of spinal cord injury research. The thing I love about Rick, if I had to coin a term for him, he is an emotional architect. Because this guy has had thousands of conversations over the course of his career. I don't know how he remembers details. I do not know how he remembers moments. And I asked him, because he came on breakfast television, they had the 25th anniversary tour where they retraced the Canadian segment of what the Man in Motion tour was. And the final day, the final leg of the relay was here in Vancouver. And I remember asking Rick, I'm like, how do you remember these? Because I could talk about every conversation counts, but how do you remember all of these conversations? And he said to me that, you know what, sometimes you might forget the conversation, but what's most important to him is making people feel empowered and important so they can achieve their full potential. And I said, okay. Now, he asked Breakfast Television to be a part of this relay, and I was fortunate enough to be the ambassador to run that relay, and we played this out live on TV. Now, the great thing about Rick is that he remembered 25 years ago, my mother, Mama Meghji, who's in the audience, she worked on his Man in Motion tour in the accounting department. So he asked me, would you like to have your mom run in the relay, and would you like to hand off the medal to your mother? And I said, I couldn't believe he remembered it, and I said I would love it. So I called my mom up and I asked her, would you want to do it? And she said, yeah. And that day, my mother came down, my dad came down, my brother was there in spirit, he was traveling, I think he was in New York City at the time. And my favorite moment in this business, and I thank Rick for that idea of the power of a conversation and making people feel important, is this photo right here. Because when I looked at this photo and I see the smile on her face, I remember 10 years ago when I was handing out flyers at the corner of Robson and Burrard, coming into my parents' bedroom, thinking, oh my God, am I making the right decision? And my mother said to me, do you think following this path will make you happy in life? And I said, yes. Then she said, you go do it. I remember all the conversations with my dad, who in the beginning, being the Indian father, said, you should get the MBA. But when he realized what the dream was and what it could be, he said, you take that risk, I'm going to be here and I'm going to support you no matter what happens. And I remember the conversation I had with my brother in 2007 when he asked me, what is it that you want? And I started writing it down on a piece of paper, what it is I wanted, and I created it. All of these conversations helped me get to where I am today. And if I could close out with a quote, I have yet to interview this person, and I know she's coming to Vancouver in October. She's the one interview I want to have, Miss Maya Angelou. And Maya said that, you know what, she has learned over the years that people may forget what you said, they may forget what you did, but they will always remember how you made them feel. And I think that is such a powerful thing, because when I wake up at 3:45 every morning, yes, it's early, I think about the idea that I have a gift to have a different conversation with somebody new and hopefully inspire the masses. So if there's anybody watching this right now that can take something away from this conversation and do something different in your life and go after what you want, I encourage you to reach out to me. There is my Twitter handle. Let me know if you do it. Let me know if you create it, because I would love to have that conversation with you on our show so we can help inspire everybody watching at home. Now, if there's one thing that you remember me by today, you see the hashtag, it is this: every conversation counts. And I look forward to having so many more. And I just want to say thank you very much for listening to this one.